Welcome back to Vintage Camera Digest. Today's episode is one I never intended to do or wanted to do. I would have been perfectly content to see this video on someone else's channel. But here I find myself in the unique position to shed some light on how the new high-power airport CT scanners affect film. So stay tuned to find out. My last video was about taking my Nikon F2 on a fantastic road trip through the American Northwest. It was a trip I'd looked forward to for months, and while I was preparing for the trip, of course I had to make a decision which camera I was going to take. My first choice was my Pentax 6x7, but then I noticed that I had a haze issue with the wide angle lens, and that lens would have been the most important one. So I decided to pivot and take my Bronica S2A. But the week before the trip, I was packing up and realized that there was no way I could fit that camera and the lenses that I needed into an already very packed camera bag. So I decided to pivot again, and this time I reached for the Nikon F2. And that turned out to be the best decision I could have made, because secondary to choosing the camera, of course, is choosing the film. And I had a good variety on hand. I had several rolls of the Pro Image 100, a bunch of HP5 and Kentmere 100 that I had bulk loaded, and one roll of the Orwo Wolfen that has an ISO of 3. I was set.
So I made it successfully to Montana, and sort of successfully, not completely successfully, because in the Atlanta airport, I had a major issue. And that almost set the tone for the trip so far, but luckily found solutions. All right, so what did I do? What screwed that thing up? All right, got about 18 rolls of film here. I've got some 100 speed, I've got some 400 speed, and I've got one of those Wolfen PF2, which is about a 3 ISO. I was going to shoot just for the fun of it, but when we got to the TSA checkpoint in Atlanta, there was some confusion around the checkpoints. One machine wasn't operating properly, and the agents were sort of back and forth a little bit, and it didn't look like things were going great. And in all of that, I forgot to mention that I wanted to get a hand check on the film. And it went through the machine. And I mean, really, I wasn't terribly concerned about that because I had flown to Rome last year and then flown back from Rome. And the film went through the security checkpoint in Rome, Italy. And I didn't have any issues with the film when I got back. Of course, when the bag of all the camera gear goes through the machine, it's like got a lot of stuff in it. It gets kicked out to, to go over for a second time, just to give it a close look. So I'm standing over there with the agent, and she was pulling up the image on the screen, and she was going through the different levels, and it was pretty cool to see how that worked. And when she saw the film canister, she said, "Oh, so you've got a lot of batteries in there." I said, "No, it's film." And then the countenance on her face just sort of like went from happy, cheerful, we're here to help you, to one of grief, because she knew that my film was dead at that point. Atlanta does have the new CT scanners. So if you go to an airport and you have a security checkpoint and there's this long round tunnel thing with blue and green lights flashing all over it, that's not just your typical x-ray machine. That's going to be that CT scanner that a lot of the airports are implying. The agent that was talking to me afterwards, she said, "You should have asked for a hand check. That's our job. That's what we need to do." And I'm like, well, I appreciate that, and I think that. I know that everybody has a different story about asking TSA security agents for a hand check on film, and it's, sometimes it turns out well, sometimes it's not a great story at all. Anyway, she said that's what their job is to do, so don't ever feel bad about asking for that to happen. Don't ever feel like you're putting them out by asking for a hand check of the film. She was very apologetic. She was sort of sad because I guess she saw the defeat in my own eyes at that point. So, how do we make this into a positive story? I'm trying not to think about how much money is in this bag of film that I just probably lost. Seeing her response makes me think that, yeah, that's probably going to be unusable. I did not bring a medium format camera with me this time. I brought my Nikon F2. So all I need is some 35mm film. We are in Kalispell, Montana, USA, and the Kalispell, Montana Walmart actually had a few boxes of Fujifilm 400, and I was shocked. And it is not expired. It is fresh. And it was no more money than I would have spent if I'd ordered it online. Or about $12 a roll. That's about what it would be anyway. Not a disaster completely. And also, while we were looking at options on the plane, trying to figure out what I was going to do and trying to get out of my funk of being, oh well, this sucks, we realized that there's also a photo camera store in Kalispell, Montana, which before I leave this place, I'll probably want to visit just to see what they have. If they're selling cameras and that sort of thing, they probably have film. So I'll check out that, see what they have too. All right, but the moral of this story, if you have film and you're going through the Atlanta airport, please ask the TSA agents for a hand check. They're aware of the issues that machine causes with film, so just do it. If they're looking like they're in a bad mood, still ask, because then you're going to be in a bad mood. Worse, probably. Also, this is a good opportunity for me to actually take 3 of these rolls of film. So I've got the ISO 3, the Wolfen in there. I've got some Kentmere 100, and I have HP 5. I'm going to take 3 of those rolls out, and everywhere we go from this point on until I get back home, I'm going to ask for a hand check on those 3 rolls. The rest of it just is going back in the bag. What I want to prove or to check out is when I get back, I'm going to develop those 3 rolls and just see what the damage is. I searched, I Googled, is the airport CT scanner going to destroy my film in Atlanta? And I get a bunch of these, yes, technically it should, or whatever. Well, I know now that my film has been scanned by that scanner in Atlanta, and I'm going to see what the damage is.
So, choosing the 35mm camera turned out to be serendipitous, since I was actually able to find film at a Walmart in Montana. And not only that, there was an actual camera store in Kalispell, Montana, where I picked up a few more rolls. I'd have much harder time finding 120 film, so I'm glad I had the Nikon. And if you want to see the rest of that story, be sure to check out the video. I'll put the link at the end of this video and down in the description. But let's get to the important part of this video. What do those new CT scanners at the airport security checkpoints really do to film? I have results for these films: Kodak Pro Image 100, Kodak Portra 400, Kentmere 100, and Ilford HP 5. Turns out I don't have the right developer for the Orwo Wolfen, so that one is still unprocessed. But let's start with the Pro Image 100. At first look, it doesn't look too bad, but let's zoom in a bit. Now we start to see that there appears to be a bit more grain to indicate that there's at least a small degree of base fog that wasn't there before. And if we get in super tight, well, it just gets a bit clearer that the film has been affected. All right, so now let's look at the Portra 400. I didn't have any 35mm that hadn't gone through the scanner, so I'm comparing it to a piece of 120 film, but it's been scanned at the same magnification as the 35. It's a little bit easier to tell right off that we have some base fog. And if we get in closer, well, yeah, it looks fairly significant. Moving on to the black and white, let's look at the Kentmere 100. Again, not really too bad at first glance. I can tell there's going to be a little fog, but it's not terrible. Getting in closer though just shows that yeah, it's been affected, but it's not terrible. Well, now let's look at the HP 5. Again, like the Portra 400 with larger grain, we can see right off the bat that there's some fog. And under higher magnification, it's evident that the grain is a lot clumpier. So I think it's safe to say that yes, the base fog of all the films has been affected. But what if we back up and instead of looking super close at the grain, we look at the strip? Well, let's look at the Pro Image 100. I don't see an obvious exposure pattern right off, but let's increase the exposure and the contrast. Maybe there's the beginning of a pattern over on the left here, but it's sort of hard to tell. But let's go look at the Portra 400. With this one, I can definitely make out some darker areas toward the bottom of the strip. And if I increase the contrast and exposure, we can definitely see that there is some sort of exposure pattern on the bottom. Looking at the Kent Mirror 100, I can make out a faint pattern in these two places, but when emphasized, it becomes pretty clear. With the HP5, yep, I can see it right away. These areas right here definitely have some density over the base, and if we emphasize it, wow, yeah, this film is toast. As for the patterns we're seeing here, I don't know if it's affected by how the film is positioned when it goes through the machine, or if it's how it's sitting in the bag, but I don't think it's going to come through unscathed. I was really hoping that the effects would be minimal, like the old X-ray machines they used to have, and I wouldn't lose all of this. But looks like I get to toss some film. So now that we know what happens to film in the new airport scanners, what's the best way to address it when you're at the TSA checkpoints? Well, like the agent told me, ask for a hand check. They're aware of the issues with film. And if you prepare properly, it'll make it easier for them and you. So you can start off by putting all your film in a clear Ziploc bag and remove all the packaging that you can. Lose these little plastic containers. Give them just the bag of actual film cassettes. Now, if you're flying with 120 film, I recommend you do the same thing. Take it out of the boxes. And some would even suggest you remove the wrappers from your rolls too. When I flew to Italy last year, I did this and it worked fine and I had no problems. Sort of seems like since the film is obviously sealed in that wrapper that this may not be necessary, but the point is to make it easy on the agents to test each roll. When you ask for the hand check, your film will probably be passed off to a different agent who's covering several different security lines. And everything will go a lot faster and smoother the easier it is for them. And the busier the airport, the more this will matter. So, I'd love to hear any experiences, good or bad, that you might have had flying with film. Do you have any additional suggestions to help this be an easier process? Be sure to let me know in the comments. But one thing I'd like us all to remember is that everybody's just trying to do the best job they can to keep us all safe when we travel. A well-placed thank you after they've done this for you just might be the highlight of their day. So remember to be kind. I'll see you next time.